I remember where I came from. There were burning buildings and fiery red sea. I remember all my lovers. I remember how they held me. World without end. Remember me? East, the edge of the world. West, those who came before me. When my father died, we put him in the ground. When my father died, it was like a whole library had burned down. You know, Alexander the Great didn't die at the Battle of Macedon, like everybody thinks he did. In fact, he was captured during the battle by a huge tribe of yellow men and forced to fight in their army as a slave. 30 years went by, and finally his captors, who could see what a great fighter he was, decided to pay him. And they gave him a bag of gold coins. And Alexander took one of the coins. And he looked at it. And on it was his own picture. And he said, "This is from the time when I was Alexander the Great." was up in Canada on a Cree Indian reservation, and one day some anthropologists arrived in a little plane with maple leaves painted on the side. And they said they were there to shoot a documentary of the tribe. So they set up their video equipment, and they asked the oldest man on the reservation to sing some songs. On the day of the taping, the old man arrived, and he was wearing a red plaid shirt, and he was blind. And they turned on some lights, and he started to sing, but he just kept starting over and sweating. Soon it was obvious that he didn't know any of the words. He just kept starting over and rocking back and forth and sweating. And the only words he seemed to be really sure of were hey, hi, hey, 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 hi, hey, hi, hey, hi. I am singing the songs, the old songs, but I can't remember the words. I am singing the songs of my fathers and of the animals they hunted down. I never knew the songs. I never went hunting. I am singing for this movie. I am doing this for money. I remember grandfather. He lay on his back while he was dying. I think I am no one. The first time I made contact with someone on a website, it was with a guy who said his interests were music and sand. And I said, sand? Now I have a kind of special interest in sand. And when I was on my first and only LSD trip, I went to the beach and I spent about 12 hours lying there looking at grains of sand. And I had decided to make a collection of the sand, and the idea was to choose just 6 of the most perfect and representative grains. A project that took all day and well into the night. And I still have this collection in a small box lined with velvet, and it has a little light that automatically turns on when you open the box. And I took some pictures of the sand with an electron microscope. And I sent the pictures to this guy at his website. And it took a few days to discover that the person I was talking to was actually a 4-year-old kid. And that his interest in sand was going out into his backyard and playing in his sandbox. And it was great, you know, I never would have come up to this guy at a party and said, hey, let's talk music and sand. On the other hand, maybe this wasn't a 4-year-old kid at all. Could have been anyone. Could have been an 80-year-old woman just pretending to be a 4-year-old kid. I wouldn't know. Copy, paste, return, file, edit, A. Where did everybody go? You know, for the past year, I've been going to all these tech conferences about the future, and there are all these computer people there, and everybody's really excited about new media. And there are seminars on e-cash and websites and search engines and home shopping, and of course lots of demos of cyber sex. And in the demos, a man and a woman sit at their computers wearing skin-tight rubber suits, and they're all wired up with sensors, and they're punching in commands that shoot little shots to the sensors. And she says, can you feel my heartbeat? Can you feel my heartbeat? And he said, okay, wait a minute, hold it. That's Command X, then hit Option and Control at the same time. Wait a minute. Just give me a second to figure it out. She says, can you feel my heartbeat? Can you feel my heartbeat? He says, you know, I just keep getting a weird message on my screen. It just keeps saying I'm losing my connection. Bad socket connection. She says, can you feel my heartbeat? Can you feel my heartbeat? He says, you know, just keep saying I'm losing my connection. Bad socket connection. Check the power supply on your modem. You know, I don't know what's happening now. Domain name error? What does that mean? You know what? I've got to go and get the manual. You know, sometimes it's hard to believe that everybody is so incredibly enthusiastic about the digital revolution. I have to say that I'm getting a little burned out on all this stuff. I now have 11 computers, and it's really a big job keeping up with the updates, and things keep crashing, and I've come to the point where half the time, all I want to do is throw all this stuff out the window. Floppies, zip drives, monitors, mice, everything. Just get rid of it. I mean, I'm spending so much time fixing things and learning new systems, and I'm thinking, wait a minute. Is this how technology is improving my life? And I find myself rereading the Unabomber's message to the world. I'm thinking, he's right. It's true. Technology is taking the human race on a reckless ride to nowhere. And speaking of rides, who thought of this phrase, the data highway, anyway? I think it was Dick Cavett who said, highway? That's something long and gray and boring that kills 40 to 50,000 people a year. But to sum it up, I'm ready to join the Lead Pencil Club, which is a sort of loose organization I just found out about. And it's based out on Long Island. And this club advocates abolishing all electronics and going back to lead pencils and magic markers. But the thing is, it's a little hard to get in touch with any of the club members, actually. So if you want to join, it's pretty difficult. Of course, the main thing about technology is that it's really big and really powerful, and not very many people really understand it. So what do you do with something really big and powerful that you don't understand? You worship it. So there's a lot of voodoo and a lot of morality that gets attached to it. Like that technology's really great and will make our lives so much better and easier. Or on the other hand, the technology isolates people. It turns them into weird, antisocial loners, typing away alone in their rooms. As if reading a book isn't also a deeply antisocial thing to do. But the thing that scares me most is that every day, technology is getting more and more global and corporate and monolithic and impossible to escape. Recently, someone said that the saddest thing about the fall of the Berlin Wall is that you could no longer defect. There's nowhere left to go. And now that technology is everywhere in the world, most artists, like everyone else, are having to figure it out. Now, one of the main things I learned from going to all these futuristic tech conferences is that there is no such thing as an artist anymore. We are now officially known as content providers. Now, why does this sound like something from the Chinese Cultural Revolution? Content providers? We'll house them over there. Now, at first, I thought this name was one of the most chilling things I'd ever heard. Then I thought about it for a while, and I sort of got used to it, and after about a year of hearing it, I'm completely adjusted. Now I actually like it. It sounds sort of practical and positive and inevitable. But as I see it, part of being a good content provider is providing good information. Now last year, I was on tour for several months, and we had a website called The Green Room, a kind of electronic information room, and we put a lot of technical stuff there about the tour and lots of related topics. And one of the biggest topics in the green room was food, maybe because getting food on a tour becomes a kind of obsession. And it started with a recipe I posted on the net. And the recipe was for something called hotel hot dogs. And I invented this recipe when I was on a press tour in Germany, and usually the interviews went on all day and into the night. And by the time they were over, all the restaurants in town would be closed. So here's how to cook a fairly good dinner right in your hotel room. Now the ingredients include 2 bratwurst, or Oscar Mayer's will also do, and the utensils include 1 lamp, a pocket knife, and wire strippers. Now here's how to make it. First, unwrap the bratwurst and place it on the bedside table. Then unplug the floor lamp. Then using the pocket knife, cut the lamp cord approximately 3 feet from the plug. Then with the wire strippers, peel the insulation from the cord, leaving about 10 inches of exposed wire. Then thread the wire through the bratwurst and tie off the wire at the end. Then just plug it in. Now cook until the bratwurst is crispy on the outside, approximately 2 seconds. And make sure the cooking time doesn't exceed 3 seconds, since the meat will explode at fairly high temperatures. Then just relax and enjoy. Now this dish is excellent accompanied by a glass of cool hotel tap water. In the US and other territories where 110 is used, add 2 additional seconds to the cooking time. Anyway, after I posted this recipe, a lot of people began to write about other kinds of food. And there were several postings on the net then about the high-speed cookbook written by that cross-country race car team. And the team did a coast-to-coast race. and they couldn't stop to eat during the race. But they got so tired of sandwiches that they adapted some recipes that could be done quickly during their pit stops using combustible engines. Things like pork roast, which goes: wrap your pork roast tightly in 30-gauge aluminum, tie next to the engine, and roast at 70 miles per hour for 6 hours. And then there's the roadkill cookbook that comes from Vermont. And this one tells you how to prepare the dead deer and possum that you find lying on the highway, and how to test the tar content of the tread marks on the animal's skins, things like that. Now the cooking section of the green room sort of got out of hand, because after a while, people on the net actually started to send real food to us. Now in Montreal, we got a shipment of beaver tail from someone in Canada, and these tails came in a big bloody plastic bag, along with color photographs, explaining how Eskimos trap beaver. Now here's how to do it, in case you find yourself needing to trap some. First, it has to be winter. So if it is, find a frozen lake and sharpen the ends of 2 large twisty branches. And then cut 2 holes in the ice near the beaver dam. Insert the 2 branches down through the ice and down into the water. Next, cut a piece of poplar, this is the bait, and insert that between the 2 branches. Then, sit around and wait. The idea is that the beaver will swim up to eat the poplar bait, but get caught in the twisty branches and drown. Now when you think this might have happened, cut a big hole in the ice around the branches and pull the chunk of ice up. If it worked, there'll be a drowned beaver frozen stiff on the bottom of the chunk of ice. Now I don't know how useful this is to you, but it reminded me that there are plenty of things that you don't really need to know, and that a lot of information isn't always better than no information at all. But back to food. I think it does have a lot to do with new technology. And a couple of months ago, I was at one of these high-tech conferences in Germany, and there were a lot of people there who specialized in predicting the future of information. And there was one very old professor there, and he had a lot of colorful charts about information on an overhead projector. And at the beginning of his talk, he announced that he was going to take the long historical view on the subject. And he had a big chart that outlined all, and he began. Thousands and thousands of years ago, back when men were hunters and gatherers, and everybody's looking at their watches because the other titles on his charts were things like the invention of sheep herding and the rise of the peasant class in medieval Eastern Europe and the discovery of coal. But after about an hour and a half, he did finally get around to his main point, which was that we are again in a hunting and gathering stage. But this time, we're hunting for information, trying to grab whatever rushes by. And it's all really disorganized, and there are no restaurants yet, no recipes. We're just sort of foraging. But the food analogy explained a lot for me, because the frantic part of the digital revolution seems like a kind of real hunger. People really seem hungry. They seem starving for information. And even more so, they're starving for new equipment. And as technologies escalate and things get faster, a lot of people get caught up in what amounts to a sort of personal arms race, building up arsenals of equipment. And for what? And so you have to keep getting more and more stuff endlessly. More bandwidth, more storage, more memory, more speed. And and you will never, ever have enough. It's like you're in a race against speed itself. It was the night flight from Houston. Almost perfect visibility. You could see the lights from all the little Texas towns far below. And I was sitting next to a 52-year-old woman who'd never been on a plane before. And she said her son had sent her a ticket and said, "Mom, you've raised 10 kids. It's time you got on a plane." And she was sitting in the window seat and staring out. And she kept talking about the Big Dipper and the Little Dipper and pointing. And suddenly, I realized that she thought we were in outer space, at the stars. And I said, "You know, I think those lights down there are the lights from Little." Last summer, I got a call from a national media organization inviting me to come to a very secret event that was being planned by an aerospace company. And they said they were going to launch the first civilian flight to the moon, and that they wanted me to come along as a kind of observer, a content provider, to write about the experience. And I couldn't believe it. It was like a dream. I kept saying, "To the moon? To the moon?" And they said they couldn't tell me exactly where or when it would be because security was very, very tight. And they said, "We'll call you back. And we'd appreciate it if you don't mention this to anyone." And I said, "Of course, I understand. Absolutely. You can count on me." And I hung up the phone and I waited for about 5 minutes. And then I called 5 friends and I said, "You won't believe this, but I just got this call and I have been invited to go to the moon." And I told them about how the first civilian flights are going to be starting in 4 years and how they're going to orbit the moon in reusable crafts. And they have all these plans to build resorts and retirement colonies there for old people who are losing their mobility, and how great it's going to be for hands suddenly do somersaults and free fall, and what the new zero-G sports are going to be like, and the new zero-G dance companies. And when I stopped talking, I just heard this silence on the other end of the line. I don't think any of my friends believed me for a second. It's like after the big Cold War race to the moon was over, everybody just sort of forgot the moon was even up there. 2 weeks later, they called again and said, "Liftoff is in approximately 1 month, so we just want you to be more or less on the alert. Can't tell you anything more." Click. And I thought, gee, shouldn't I be doing some sort of training for this? I mean, you just show up and climb on board, and I started having nightmares that I was a lifeguard on the moon, and people and things kept getting yanked out into space in this lunar riptide, and I had to keep going out there and rescuing them. And in other nightmares, I was on the moon looking back down at the Earth and thinking about how billions of years ago the moon had been sheared away from the Earth, and how it left this big gaping hole that filled with water and became the Pacific Ocean, and how the moon keeps pulling on the Earth, trying to get back. The next call was 2 days later, and they said the flight was proceeding on schedule and that it was going to be a very, very important simulation. And I said, "What do you mean, simulation? You mean we're not going up?" And they said that actually this was not going to be an active launch and that they hoped there hadn't been any misunderstanding, but the deal was that we were just going to sit on the ground in a capsule pretending we were going to the moon. But they weren't a scientific project because they wanted to know whether this flight could be considered a vacation. Would it be relaxing? Would people want to go more than once? And they kept repeating that I was the perfect person to try to figure this out. Now, I don't really know why they picked me for this. I myself don't have any vacation skills at all. Now, partly this is genetic. My Swedish ancestors are really a pretty gloomy bunch. They get fun completely backwards. So if they go to a funeral where they're supposed to be sad, they find us very easy. Comes pretty naturally. So this makes them very happy. But when they're invited to a party where they're supposed to have fun, they find this incredibly difficult and defeating. And so they get even more depressed and sad. Anyway, I finally arrived at the simulated liftoff, determined to have fun, or at least to analyze whether other people were having any. And the day of the blast-off, they were playing the theme from 2001 on a boombox. And the 8 people chosen for the flight lined up and entered the craft, which was made of sheetrock and plywood and blinking lights. And for 4 days, we monitored their every move with microphones and cameras. And every few minutes, Mission Control would give them bits of information about where they supposedly were in space. And the flight crew kept giving them little jobs to do that had to be prefaced with the exact military time. 400 hours, humidity, nominal, pressure, nominal, thrust, 0.478. And they had to memorize all these paramilitary commands and rules and repeat specs on things like liquid nitrogen. And every 2 hours, they were given questionnaires. Things like, do you feel this is a good vacation so far? Do you find this flight relaxing? How do you feel about your fellow passengers? Has your opinion of them changed since the last questionnaire? And it was all so incredibly claustrophobic. If you can imagine being trapped in a parked station wagon for 4 days with your family, answering questions every 2 hours about how much you liked them, then this would give you some idea of the excitement level inside the capsule. 20 minutes would go by, and someone would say, "Do you want another Pop-Tart?" No thanks. And we wrote all this stuff down. And with every hour, the capsule looked more and more like the day room in a mental ward. And finally, after 4 days, the passengers came out of the capsule. And they were playing the 2001 theme song again. And I thought they'd all be in a really bad mood after following a lot of rules for 4 straight days. But instead, they were all saying things like, this experience in space has really changed my life. I just see things differently now. Just to be up there in the middle of all those stars, it was awesome. I felt so small. And I thought, this is amazing. I'm seeing the incredible power of the human imagination. And this is why humans will survive. We'll survive because we're basically completely insane.
Dale, please, sir.
You know, when I ran a civilization for several years, a civilization of 300 to 400 wonderful men. We had our own laws, we had our own, practically our own constitution, and I was the sovereign for a good bit of that. And I tried to analyze human predicaments in that microcosm of life in the world. You've got to have leaders, and they're out there who can do this with their bare hands, with working with people on the scene. Ladies and gentlemen.
So tonight I'm going to talk about 3 different places. A theater, a mental hospital, and a control room. And how these places are beginning to merge into one big techno-culture in which machines outnumber humans by 1,000 to 1. Now in America, techno-theaters everywhere. Entertainment centers, colossal malls, interactive arcades, ride films, simulations, VR. Disneyfication of the world is in full swing, featuring their version of all American fun. Anyway, recently, as a content provider, I've been thinking that maybe artists are actually using the wrong tools. Now that almost everybody is happily painting away in Photoshop and making their millions of colors websites and creating perfectly scanned-in photorealist interactive butterflies programmed to make ambient house music as they mate in various virtual environments, maybe it's a good time for artists to start thinking along some other lines. Now I have a friend who's planning to open a club in London. It's going to be a big multimedia workshop where artists can use a lot of the cool new tools. And the building used to be a mental hospital. And we were sitting around thinking about how much art schools are like mental hospitals. You know, they're these long corridors and people are locked away in their studios and they're working on really specific, really kind of peculiar things with enormous concentration. And I was telling my friend my theory that artists weren't using the right tools. And I suggested doing some projects at his club, some therapies for people who've been using too much technology. And they would include things like scale therapy, which would be about how to change scale quickly and flexibly. Like how on the one hand we're all just meaningless specks of dust floating about for a second in the cosmos, and on the other hand how we can suddenly fill up an entire room with a single good idea. Another would be speed therapy, subtitled The Speed of Darkness. And speed therapy would touch on St. Thomas Aquinas, who describes the way time seems to stop between messages from angels. The angel delivers a message, and then 1,000 years go by of nothing, until there's another totally unrelated message. And time just seems to halt between these messages. There's no stream, no connections. So speed therapy would speculate about what happens in these digital pauses. Now this is a fairly long-term therapy. Now another would be ego therapy, and this would ask the question, is art about self-expression? Now this might involve building some three-dimensional prototypes, and I'm thinking of a room that I was planning to build in my loft at one point, and it was going to be an ego room, and a very tall vertical room filled with posters from my own shows and flattering photographs of myself and awards and great reviews. And in the middle there was going to be this trampoline so I could just, keep jumping up over and over. And then there's identity therapy, which is based on the principle that if you don't know who you really are anyway, it frees you. And I got this idea from some friends who work in an office, and they said that they were getting really jagged from their coffee breaks. Every time they had coffee, they were just feeling more and more driven, and it wasn't relaxing at all. So they started having wig breaks instead. Around 11 every morning, they all went into a small room and tried on wigs for 15 minutes, and after a while, they weren't really that certain about who they were anymore, and they found this pretty relaxing. So that's wig therapy. And then there's the related sheep therapy, which involves cloning yourself in a kind of mass production process until there's so many of you, the original has absolutely no meaning. And by the way, this name Dolly is so great. You couldn't think of a more perfect word for the world's first clone than Dolly. And I don't know how many of you have been to Dollywood, the theme park in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee, but it's a pretty amazing place. And there are all these little rides and replicas of Dolly's family church and a copy of the original family shack and a flag in the shape of a huge bra that's flown whenever Dolly is in town. But the striking thing is that almost all the employees of Dollywood look amazingly alike. Same eyes, same hair, same general body type, and it's really eerie until you look at the bronze plaque at the entrance to the park with all the employees' names on it, and you realize that she's hired all her relatives to work there, people who for generations have taken a kind of regional approach to evolution. So sheep therapy would look at genetics from the point of view of legal and moral responsibilities to your copies. And then there's taboo therapy, which involves finding out what really grosses everyone out, starting with a recent controversy that came up in a so-called alternative New York art space. And it turns out that people on this scene, which has sponsored performances ranging from live scarification to bloody urine soakings, were offended by a recent very graphic performance of featuring really old people having sex. So if you can find out what scares people, you might also find out what they like and value. And in music therapy, there's words that never appear in songs, which involves writing lists of these words like vapor and lawyers and calcium and imbrication and so on. And then obviously writing songs using as many of these words as possible. And then there's, finally, sleep therapy, which means that you just lose consciousness in various ways for about a year. And when you come to, there'll be a lot of new things that are bothering you. And your old problems will seem really trivial in comparison. when you hear someone screaming, it goes in one ear and out the other. And sometimes, when you hear someone screaming, it goes right into the middle of your head and stays there forever. When you're sleeping and it's totally dark and absolutely silent and you don't dream. Well, this is the reason. It's because on those nights you've gone away. On those nights you're in someone else's dream. You're busy in someone else's dream.
To the sweet swinging music that came from their radios, that came from their hearts.
They listened to the music, to the sweet swinging music that came from their radios, that came from their gods.
You know what I really like about cyberspace is the rumors. Like the recent so-called Associated Press release that announced that the so-called Vatican had been bought out by Microsoft. And a so-called Archbishop commented on the takeover. We're thrilled. We've been using icons for over 2,000 years. And Microsoft has only been doing it for a few. So think of the potential. Stand by. But out on the web, it's really easy to feel sort of isolated and anonymous. So a lot of the sites seem to be designed like ads for yourself. So you come across all these personal websites and QuickTime Movies, The Family Dog, and personality sketches and diaries. And then there's the woman who runs the steam room, a kind of claustrophobic museum filled with information about all her former boyfriends, with all sorts of information about them and their home phone numbers, descriptions of their habits and jobs and personalities and addresses. Electronic publishing has become a way of making your own life into an endless sitcom or tabloid, and it uses some of the same techniques that pop culture uses when it turns some of its people into icons, otherwise sort of average or even dull. And it reminds me of something I saw last summer in Zurich. And I was passing the train station, and I heard what sounded like a riot. Now I'm always ready for a riot, and I happened to have my Polaroid, so I rushed into the station. And in the middle of the station, there was this huge statue of Michael Jackson made of fiberglass that looked like granite. And this thing was about 4 stories high, and looked like a combination of Stalin and some Nordic god. And it's wearing a bikini and Mexican-style bandolero bullet belts crossed over the chest, and shoes the size of cars. And he's standing with his legs far apart on a huge pedestal inscribed Michael Jackson, his story. And there was a huge sound system, but they weren't playing the record. They were playing the sounds of uneasy crowds about to riot. Now, this turned out to be a really good idea under the circumstances, because it's never good PR to unveil something of this size in total silence. And the only people there were about 200 members of the Brazilian soccer team, stuck between trains and the station, sitting on their sports sacks and licking ice cream cones, and some early commuters on their way out to suburbia, and then all these rioting crowd sound effects echoing off the walls of the station. And there was a Swiss guy in gold lame pants standing on the pedestal between these gargantuan legs. And he had a microphone, and he was giving some kind of really enthusiastic political speech in this Swiss-German dialect. And apparently one of the sub-themes of the record was that somehow Michael Jackson's music was instrumental in the freeing of Eastern Europe. And I just stood there laughing for about 10 minutes. I thought it was so great. And actually, I've always thought of Michael Jackson as just kind of another pop artist, although I think his production was really fantastic. But as I looked at the statue, I was really changing my mind. I mean, my estimation of his art shot up by about 1,000%, and I now think he may be one of the greatest artists of our century. I mean, conceiving of yourself as a giant action doll from outer space, and using Stalinist propaganda techniques, this is a certain kind of weird genius. And so what if he didn't actually think of it himself? You know, a lot of artists work in teams now. And then, of course, there's the part about actually marrying and then divorcing the king's daughter, which adds a whole other dimension. I mean, this guy is fantastic. Now, one of the other great websites to check out is Graceland, where you can find out things like that Elvis used to go riding around with the police, and he loved stopping people and pulling them over. But he didn't actually have the authority to write out tickets, so he'd just give them autographs instead. And last time I was at the Graceland site, I checked into an electronic seance in which they managed to contact the king in the afterworld. And the communication system was 2 knocks. Yes. And 1 knock. No. And it went like this. Elvis. Elvis. Is that you? Really? Oh, that's great. So, Elvis, do you approve of all the renovations we've been doing here at Graceland? All the new attractions? attractions and exhibits and our online presence and our interactive website and the new interface. Oh, that's great. So it's really fortunate because we've gone to a lot of trouble and expense here building this stuff. But of course, Elvis is sort of an exception. There aren't really that many dead people on the net. In fact, it seems like everyone there is sort of newly minted, like they came from nowhere. And it reminds me of something I saw in an online magazine about UFOs. And the lead article in the magazine was titled, "Do Your Grandparents Come from Outer Space?" And there was a checklist to fill out to find out if they did. And the questions are things like, did your grandparents use advanced electronic equipment? Did your grandparents always seem to have an uncanny knowledge of the future? Were your grandparents always giving advice? Did your grandparents work for the betterment of life on this planet? Did the stories your grandparents told you about their own backgrounds vary each time they were told? And since in my case, the answer to all the questions was a definite yes, and because their stories were a little vague, I've been thinking about all four of them in a whole new way. But to tell the truth, I did once have a positive experience in digital communication, and it was a conference on naturally the future of communications and technology. And it was coming from Montreal, where there was a conference on theater and new media. And there was an audience in Montreal, and then hookups to the director Robert Lepage in Quebec City, and a digital artist in Amsterdam, and the violinist Pinkas Zuckerman in Tokyo, and myself in Frankfurt. And this was a kind of system in which the audio was a continuous stream, but the picture only updated itself every few seconds as still images. So you'd be looking at a series of these sort of frozen expressions, and it always looked like the person who was talking was just sort of shocked and amazed by the words that had just come out of their own mouths. But the conference began with a lot of generalizations about technology, really stiff, what will theater look like on the net, blah, blah, blah. And at one point, we were having a lot of trouble with the audio in our studio, and they kept saying, Frankfurt, could you please get off the line? Now, it's not that I personally mind being asked to leave, but in this case, since I was Frankfurt, I took it pretty personally. And finally, we worked it out and continued. But the high point was definitely Pinkas, who suddenly came on the line, and his voice was like extra loud, and he was shouting, "Hey, Laurie, can you hear me? Is this thing working? It's nice to meet you. Say, how much did you practice the violin today?" And this really caught me off guard, because this was a real question, and suddenly I had to respond, and I don't know why I did this. I just panicked, I just lied. I said, 8 hours, practiced for 8 hours. I haven't practiced for 8 hours probably ever, and I don't really know why I said that. Maybe because his voice reminded me of my violin teacher, who I also lied to about the amount of time that I practiced. Anyway, Pinkas was really enthusiastic about this new toy, and he was moving around making these gestures, and I was watching his hands and thinking, what a great masterclass he could give this way. And then I thought you could do so many things this way, Marty Scorsese could meet with young filmmakers and look at them and talk about their films. And anyway, Pinkas went on and he said, so Laurie, so you're in Frankfurt. Now just go over the Alta Opera, and just to your right, just look to your right, and you'll see this fantastic Italian restaurant, the best in Germany, and tell them Pinkas sent you. And that did it for me. I mean, that was really practical. I did go over to the restaurant. It was closed, by the way, but then nothing's perfect. But back to control rooms. The main thing, at least in America, is that computers have a lot to do with work. And work is a sort of religion in America. We actually call it the work ethic. So you turn on the TV and there are all these shows about people working. Doctors, lawyers, cops, spacemen, teams of people on the job. So you come home from work and you turn on the TV and you watch these other people work. And then after these shows, there's the news, and the newscasters are sitting behind their desks working. And after that, it's on to the talk show host, and he's still at work too, even though by now it's about midnight. You know, he's still sitting behind a desk. He's like this workaholic, you know, last guy to be in the office kind of guy. And he's got a phone, and he's always sort of pressed for time. I mean, we really like work a lot. Now, most of these TV work teams, whatever their jobs, have a boss. And she is fill-in-the-blank precinct captain, top surgeon, anchorman, white-haired head of the law firm. This character is usually pretty empathetic. Someone who's got the big picture, calm, in control. And these are the characters that the plots really hinge on. And I'm thinking now of two well-known epic American stories that are about work and control. And they're both stories about teams of people working in ships. And the stories are Star Trek and Moby Dick, and their ships, the Enterprise and the Pequod. And these stories are separated by almost 150 years. And although they have a lot in common, very long voyage, a powerful captain, dangerous encounters and wild adventures, they couldn't be more different. Now in the Star Trek series, the ship is pretty high-tech, and the immaculate workers are endlessly typing commands into their computers and talking into their headsets, presumably affecting the course of the ship somehow. But the person who's really in charge is up on the bridge, and the plot of each episode is the same. Everybody's working away, and suddenly, for some reason or another, the ship goes out of control, and the captain starts yelling from the bridge. I've lost control. I've lost control of the ship. And the whole plot of the story is how the captain regains control of the ship. And it's no coincidence that the whole drama happens in the control room. Now in Moby Dick, the ship is also pretty high-tech by 19th century standards. A kind of floating factory. And there's the hard-working crew and the captain. Except in this ship, the captain is completely crazy. But what finally happens in Moby Dick is pretty horrendous. The captain goes more or less insane. The ship is snapped in half. The crew drowns, and the captain is dragged to the bottom of the ocean by the whale he's been fanatically hunting. The end. And there aren't even any little epigrams, like in King Lear. When at the end, the king learns he can love some people just a little bit. In Moby Dick, it all just ends. And it's such an incredibly dark story. I mean, you can't imagine telling a story like that now. For example, the Enterprise explodes in a huge accident, and the debris from the wreck gets sucked into a black hole, and in the last shot, there's a single spaceman turning around, swinging around and around, alone in space. Call me Ishmael. The end. Now, this would never happen, even if it was the very last episode, and the series was slated to go permanently off the air. But what I'm trying to say is that here we are, in the late 20th century, and we're designing our own personal control rooms, the ones in our homes and offices. And the stories we tell ourselves are about how to get more and more perfect, more and more in control. And I want to read you a story that I wrote almost 20 years ago. And it's called The Language of the Future. And it's actually a true story, even though the voice has been changed.
Okay, where was I? Last year, I was on a twin-engine plane coming from Milwaukee to New York City, and just over LaGuardia, one of the engines conked out, and we started to drop straight down, flipping over and over. Then, the other engine died, and we went completely out of control. New York City started to get taller and taller. A voice came over the intercom and said,
Our pilot has informed us that we are about to attempt a crash landing. Please extinguish all cigarettes. Place your tray tables in their upright locked position. Your captain says, please do not panic. Your captain says, place your head in your hands. Captain says, place your head on your knees. Captain says, put your hands on your head, put your hands on your knees. This is your captain. Have you lost your dog? We are going down. We are all going down together.
As it turned out, we were caught in a downdraft and rammed into a bank. It was, in short, a miracle. But afterwards, I was terrified of getting onto planes. The moment I started walking down that aisle, my eyes would clamp shut, and I would fall into a deep, impenetrable sleep. You don't want to see this. You don't want to be here. Have you lost your dog? Now finally, I was able to remain conscious, but I always had to go up to the forward cabin and ask the stewardesses if I could sit next to them. Hi, mind if I join you? And they were always rather irritated. Oh, all right, what a baby. And I watched their uniforms crack as we made nervous chit-chat. Now, sometimes even this didn't work, and I'd have to find one of the other passengers to talk to. Now, you can spot these people immediately. There's one on every flight. Someone who's really on your wavelength. Now, I was on a flight from LA when I spotted one of them sitting across the aisle. A girl, about 15, and she had this stuffed rabbit set up on her tray table, and she kept arranging and rearranging the rabbit and kind of waving to it. Hi. Hi there. And I decided this is the one I want to sit next to. So I sat down and we started to talk, and suddenly I realized she was speaking an entirely different language. Computerese, a kind of a high-tech lingo. Everything was circuitry, electronics, switching. If she didn't understand something, it just didn't scan. Now, we talked mostly about her boyfriend, and this guy was never in a bad mood. He was in a bad mode. Moody kind of a guy. And the romance was apparently kind of rocky, and she kept saying, man, oh man, you know, like, oh man, it's so digital. And she just meant the relationship was on again, off again, always two things switching, current runs through bodies, and then it doesn't. It was a language of sounds, of noise, of switching, of signals. It was the language of the rabbit, the caribou, the penguin, the beaver, a language of the past. Current runs through bodies, and then it doesn't. On again, off again, always two things switching, one thing instantly replaces another. It was the language of the future. Put your knees up to your chin. Have you lost Put your hands over your eyes. Jump out of the plane. There is no pilot. You are not alone. This is the language of the on again, off again future, and it is digital.
You are out of memory. Save. Save now. Save. You are out of memory. Format. You are out of memory. Save. Save now. Save. You are out of memory.
Rain keeps pouring down, houses are cracking, people drown, cars are rusting here, the church floats by, washed in the blood of the Lamb. And all the super highways have disappeared one by one, and all the towns and cities and signs underwater echo. We're going down by the muddy river. We're walking down by the muddy river. We're going down by the muddy river. Men and women in their boats try to save what they've lost. They're yelling, it's all gone now. We're never gonna find it again. But when the muddy river starts to rise, it covers us all. And when I look into your eyes, two tiny clocks, two crystal balls, we begin again. We try, we begin again. Down by, we're going down by the muddy river. We begin again, down by the muddy river. Traveling up the street of and wild beasts shall rest there. And owls shall answer one another there. And the hairy ones shall dance there. And sirens in the temples of pleasure. And I'm going to close with a short song that's about the fact that it's really hard to express everything in words. And it's for something called a pillow speaker. It's like this. And usually, these speakers are used so that you can record things and play them back while you sleep. So you can do things like learn German in your own personal night school. And this never worked for me. I usually just woke up feeling kind of paranoid. But I always wanted to sing like a violin, so that's what I've recorded here. But being a somewhat oral person, I get a thrill out of putting electronics in my mouth, so here it is.
my work has a lot of words in it. You know, it's just and I can't just stand there in front of an audience that doesn't speak English and it's not that. The work that I'm doing now involves, it's centered on, the brains of it are a huge computer called the Genesis computer, and it controls hundreds of images that keep going, you know. It was such a thrill to have contact with people like that. Just turn that key of language and suddenly, you know, they're with you. 'Cause it is,
As one of the premier performance artists in America, Laurie Anderson has consistently exploded the boundaries of art and music. Now, Laurie Anderson returns to intrigue, entertain, and challenge audiences with two important new releases. Available this fall on Warner Reprise Video is Home of the Brave, Laurie Anderson's critically acclaimed concert movie. Filmed before a live audience, Home of the Brave is a 90-minute tour de force, showcasing Anderson's artistry on such landmark works as Language is a Virus and Sharky's Night.
It's Sharky's Night tonight. Hey, keep us sunny. Long time no see. Hey, sport. You connect the dots. You pick up the pieces.
Also releasing this fall is Strange Angels, the first studio album from Laurie Anderson in 5 years, featuring 10 brand new Laurie Anderson originals and displaying for the first time the full range of Anderson's vocal talents.
Last night I saw a host of angels, and they were all singing different songs, and it sounded like a lot of lawnmowers mowing down my lawn, and up above Virgilians of stars spangled all over the sky.
this record was and is one of the strangest projects I've ever worked on. I started out with, I thought, I have a few nice things kind of around the house, put them together and make a record, and I think I can do it real fast. This was a couple of years ago, and because one of the things that happened was, I thought, well, maybe I'll just write one new song. And I thought, well, that was fun, maybe I'll write a couple more. And then so it became, the writing process became really part of the recording. This last record is a kind of combination of those things, because I've written a lot of new songs and then tried them out just a little bit and watched people. Particularly, there's a song called Beautiful Red Dress that when I've performed it, it's a song, a very sort of political song, sort of about women. I've got a beautiful red dress and you look really good standing beside it. It's kind of women song. Or, let's see, what are some of the other lyrics from it? Just the other day, I won the lottery. I mean, lots of money. I got so excited, I ran into my place and I said, "Hey, is anybody home?" And nobody answered, but I guess that's not too weird since I live alone. I've got a beautiful red dress and you look really good standing beside it, girls. And then the girls come in, and the girls are backup singers, electronic backup singers, because they're just easier to deal with on the road. You can actually put them in a, case, lock them up. Good night, girls. It's great. So there are lots of voices in these things. In the live shows, big 5 microphones sort of like rise up out of nowhere. Here they're girls now.
I've got a beautiful red dress, and you look really good standing beside it, girl. We can take it, and if we can, we're gonna fake it. We're
Elvis came back from Germany, you know, when he was in the army, I remember he kept saying, man, you know, things are so different here. It looks so different after being away. And the reporters are going, so Elvis, you know, what's it going to be like for you when things get back to normal? And Elvis said, well, you know, when things get back to normal, I'll be driving a truck. Actually, it's a song about Elvis and Superman, a song called Strange Angels, that's about sort of disappearing acts, because this show is sort of a magic show, really. And it's a little bit about Superman's alter ego, who's, you know, a newspaperman, which is very handy if you're a superhero to have a guy from the press as your alter ego, because he can always, you know, just follow you around and write about it and file it instantly. And Elvis makes appearances, as he does continually all around the world, in various shopping malls. And
it was one of those days, larger than life, when your friends came to dinner and they stayed the night. And then they cleaned out the refrigerator, they ate everything in sight. And then they stayed up in the living room and they cried all night. Strange angels singing just for me, old story haunting me. This is nothing.
The relationship of record to performance is always a little bit oblique, really, because the show is, the performance is a solo thing, and on the record there are just hundreds of sounds, thousands. I meant to count the number of notes, but that's going to be another project.
Laurie Anderson's live performances have always been the focal point of her music, and the upcoming tour for Strange Angels will be no exception. Earlier this year, some of the songs from Strange Angels were previewed internationally in several different languages.
Done a lot of concerts in other languages, German, French, Italian, but the hardest was probably Japanese. And the first time that I did a concert in Japanese, I decided, well, I'll just sing all the songs in Japanese. And so I spent some time, and quite a lot of time, and learned it painstakingly, phonetically, and, you know, I was pretty proud of this, you know. But after the first concert, this Japanese promoter came backstage and said, you know, excuse me, you know, pardon me, but you speak English very well, but excuse me, pardon me, you know, in Japanese, you have a slight stutter. And really, this is unbelievable, because I'd spent so much time on this. And then I worked with the translator and said, what does he mean? What does he mean? And it turns out that the guy who had made the cassette for me to listen to things had a slight stutter, you know, and I'd learned all of this, like, exactly dead on, you know, like this one particular word is tsuru, and this other one was tsutsuru, you know, and I was kind of monkeying along, you know, just mimicking. And so I basically developed a pretty much permanent stutter in Japanese, and which makes it pretty hard if you work like me with a lot of electronics and go into this, you know, your local outlet, and you go, so do you have anything from you know, Sony, or what about the Mitsubishi or Hitachi or Nakamichi, you know, and so it makes you, you know, just want to switch around to, you know, GE, yeah, that'd be fine.
Starlight, star bright, we're gonna hang some new stars in the heavens tonight. They're gonna circle by day, they're gonna fly by night. We're going sky high.
Look for both Home of the Brave and Strange Angels, coming this fall on Warner Reprise Video and Warner Brothers Records.